What's going on, my fellow rock and rollers? Don't forget to smash the bell notification icon to be notified every time I put out a new video on my channel. To a lot of people, punk rock's peak lasted from the mid to late 70s, and it seemed like punk rock was a flash in the pan, but something that's often overlooked is that even long after punk rock was thought to be dead, there was one punk band that would inspire countless other bands, varying genres, who followed in their footsteps. Who am I talking about? Stay tuned to find out. Today we're going to be talking about the band Discharge. The band didn't just inspire other punk bands, but they were hugely influential on the metal bands that would go on to dominate the 80s and 90s. It was the band's debut record, Hear Nothing, See Nothing, Say Nothing, that would unite once sworn enemies, punk rockers, and metalheads. Influential metal musician Steve Von Till, frontman for the band Neurosis, reflected on the influence of the band's debut record, saying, "I've realized how much I've been influenced by what I call the Discharge haiku. It's like a strange style of poetry, these short images of war and political deception. Unlike their earlier records, most songs were 4 lines tops, but they say so much. It makes it epic, and you can apply them to your own time." He would go on to say, "I was into metal at the time, and this was before I found punk. But when the punks started telling us metal guys that we should listen to this album, we were intrigued," he'd add. Now, Discharge would form in 1977 in the English town of Stoke-on-Trent, the same town where Guns N' Roses guitarist Slash and Lemmy from Motorhead were born in. During the early days of the band, no one thought the group would make much of an impact on punk or the metal scene. Even by his own admission, guitarist Tony Bones Roberts would reveal how they were inspired by the bands who came before them and wanted to simply play music, revealing to Metal Hammer, "We just listened to The Clash and the Sex Pistols and we're having a go at doing that," he'd say. Like pretty much every rock band, Discharge went through its fair share of lineup changes during their formative years. In addition to the lineup changes, they would also release a number of pretty straightforward singles and EPs, but the band soon found a base with the small but loyal anarcho-punk scene of the 1980s. Drummer Gary Maloney would reveal what was so exciting about the scene the band was involved in, saying, "It was like a lifestyle that was different, exciting, like-minded people hanging out and going to gigs. It was brilliant. From my first show seeing The Damned at Barbarella's in Birmingham to a few years later watching Black Flag's soundcheck sitting on my flight case, I loved it all," he'd say. And prior to recording their debut record, the band would settle on a lineup consisting of the classic members of bassist Ryston Wainwright, drummer Gary Maloney, Anthony Bones Roberts playing guitar, and vocalist Kelvin Cal Morris. And as the band entered the studio to record their debut record, they had no clue they'd create the blueprints for bands like Metallica, Sepultura, and Napalm Death. And Bones would reveal in the same interview, "We really hit on something around that time. We had gone from sounding like a normal punk band into sounding like something else. It was all natural though. We never tried to sound a certain way. We just started writing sounds about how we felt, and we felt like how that record sounded," he'd say. Discharge would sign a record deal with local label Clay Records, who also housed the other hugely influential punk band GBH. And since they were signed to an independent label, the band wasn't given much time in the studio, and most songs on their debut album were done in 1 or 2 takes, but it didn't really matter. The results spoke for themselves, and Hear Nothing would combine elements of punk and metal. The songs on the group's debut album shocked fans. The songs were bite-sized pieces no longer than 2.5 minutes, featuring the famous D-drum beats synonymous with punk and metal. The album tackled the horrors of war, capitalism, nihilism, paranoia, political deception, and violence. It's important to remember that these songs were written during the height of the Cold War and during Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's time in office. The threat and paranoia of a nuclear war with Russia would create a great deal of mistrust of the country's government, with the title track featuring the lyrics, "Given what's going on in the world right now, the album's themes are still relevant today, and it seems like mistrust of the government has only grown larger with time." Drummer Gary Maloney would add his take on the theme of the album, saying, "The threat of war and government law is still out there. There are threats that keep us all in line." And the band didn't expect many people to pick up on the record, but John Peel of the BBC played the band on Radio 1, and from that point on, the band members started to get some attention from the public, and they soon bridged the divide between punk rockers and metal fans who were typically adversarial to one another. Discharge would go on to influence countless bands who would try to copy the band's style, and going so far to even cover the band's songs, including groups like Metallica, Anthrax, Sepultura, and Machine Head. Bones would tell Metal Hammer, "There's some of our records that I can't listen to, not this one. It's just got something about it, hasn't it? a magic that you can't explain. It's timeless, he'd conclude. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like button and subscribe. If you guys have suggestions for future topics, drop them down in the comment section below. If you guys want to support my channel, simply watch another video or go check us out on Patreon. Take care.